My family laughed at me while I served their table, but I bought their neighborhood, and then I've been working part-time at a small, no-frills diner in Hartwood, Missouri for just over a year now. It's not something I need to do for money, not really, but I keep showing up 3 days a week because the work is simple, the people are decent, and it gives me something to do besides manage spreadsheets and broker real estate contracts. Most of the folks who come in know me by name, and none of them have any idea I own one of the largest private property investment firms in the region. I like it that way. Keeps me grounded. The truth is, I've spent most of my life being treated like I didn't matter. That's not an exaggeration. Since I was a kid, my parents have made it perfectly clear where I stand in the family hierarchy, right at the bottom, with the dust and the doormats. My older brother, Bryce, he was the golden one. Got into a fancy East Coast boarding school when we were teenagers, and our parents took out a second mortgage just to cover what his scholarship didn't. Meanwhile, I was told college might not be realistic and that I should look into learning a trade, maybe plumbing or something that didn't involve high expectations. I'll never forget sitting at the kitchen table during my junior year of high school, the house smelling faintly of burnt toast, when my mom looked me in the eye and told me, "Wesley, not everyone is meant for greatness, and that's okay. Some people are meant to support the ones who are." I was 16 when she said that to me, like it was some kind of mercy. Bryce was already off living his prep school life, and I was commuting to a rundown public school where the highlight of my day was a working vending machine. After high school, I worked construction. No support, no encouragement, just labor and exhaustion. When I finally moved out at 20, after saving enough from years of demo jobs and drywall contracts, my dad handed me a toilet plunger as a housewarming gift. Not a card, not a handshake, a plunger wrapped in a grocery bag. Said I'd probably need it. That was his send-off. It's been 9 years since that day, and not once have they asked how I'm doing. They'll call Bryce twice a week, visit him in Cleveland for brunch, post pictures on social media like he's the president of Earth. Me? I'm the ghost. According to them, I don't exist, or worse, I do, and I'm a source of embarrassment. A few weeks ago, that all came to a head. I was working my usual Thursday lunch shift, apron on, name tag clipped, stacking cups and prepping tables before the rush. Place was half full when the host came over and said, "Hey Wes, this one's yours, foretop by the window." I looked up, and for a second, I thought I was hallucinating. There they were, my parents and Bryce, dressed like they were headed to a yacht club, sitting down with some woman I didn't recognize. Bryce was the first to see me. He smirked in that same smug way he always did when we were kids, and I tripped over my shoelaces. Then, loud enough for the entire section to hear, he pointed right at me and said, "No way. Still rocking that sad little uniform at 29? What a damn waste." He said it like it was a joke, like the rest of the room was in on it. The clink of silverware and soft hum of conversation around us went dead quiet. I stood there, frozen, holding 2 pitchers of water like I was about to audition for a tragedy. Bryce leaned toward his date, eyes wide with mock concern, and said, "This is my brother. We usually tell people he's in prison. It's less humiliating." The woman laughed, but it was awkward, like she didn't quite know if it was okay. My mom got up from her chair and walked over to me. I thought for half a second she might apologize or at least pretend to be embarrassed, but she just placed a hand on my forearm and whispered loud enough for the next table to hear, "This is why we took down your photos, sweetheart. When friends ask, we just say we have one son." My manager, Neil, was standing by the register, watching it all unfold, probably trying to figure out if he needed to step in. And then my dad chimed in. He pulled out his wallet, not with kindness, but with that same look you give to someone holding a cardboard sign at an intersection. He tossed a few crumpled bills on the table and said, "Here's $60, Wes. Maybe you can finally pull yourself together." Bryce laughed. "Tell them about the Beamer," he said, nudging his date. "Tell them how many parking spots it takes up. I just bought my second place last month. Real estate, baby." She leaned in and asked if I was on the spectrum or just slow. Bryce didn't correct her, just snorted like it was the funniest thing she'd said all afternoon. Everyone in the diner was looking at me now. My coworker Amber stood frozen behind the pie case, eyes wide, holding a dessert menu like it was a weapon. The customers at the next table started whispering, shifting uncomfortably. I felt like I was being dissected under a microscope, but I didn't say a word. I smiled, set the pitchers down, and said, "I'll be your server today." I took their order like nothing had happened, asked how they wanted their steaks, whether they wanted fries or mashed potatoes, if they'd like to start with a salad. My hands weren't shaking. My voice didn't crack. That pissed them off more than anything. Throughout the meal, my dad kept up the show. Told me maybe it was time to aim higher. Said Bryce might have a contact at his firm who could find something appropriate for me, meaning a job where I'd be out of sight. Bryce bragged about his office view, the gym in his building, the way valet always remembered his name. None of it was new. I'd been listening to the same broken record my whole life. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to find out, was that after I left construction, I didn't just drift aimlessly. I got my license, started buying distressed properties, flipped 2 of them by the time I turned 24, and met my business partner, Dylan, during a renovation project no one else wanted. I understood wiring, foundations, inspections. He had capital and connections. We made it work. Now, at 29, I co-own a firm that's about to close on a project that might change this entire county's real estate footprint. I bought my house on Clearwater Ridge in cash last spring. I drive a used pickup with mud on the tires because I like it. And I work at this diner because I chose to, not because I had to. After they finished their lunch, 15% tip, of course, my manager came over and asked if I was all right. I nodded. Amber offered to key Bryce's car. I actually laughed. That night, I sat on my back porch, overlooking the lake, and thought about all the years I let them make me feel like less. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt focused. Something in me had clicked. Something final. I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and called Dylan. "It's time," I said. "Let's move on Clearwater. I want the paperwork done by Monday." Because Bryce's second house, the one he just bought, it sits in the exact neighborhood my company is about to buy and transform from the ground up. And no one, especially not him, has any idea. That night after the restaurant incident, I couldn't sleep more than a few hours. I'd never been humiliated like that before, not publicly, not in a place where I'm respected, where I actually feel comfortable. I kept replaying the way Bryce had laughed like he was on stage, and the look in my mother's eyes like I was a stranger she pitied. The worst part wasn't even the insult itself, it was how natural it seemed to them. Like they'd been practicing it for years and had just been waiting for the perfect audience. The next morning, I drove into town for coffee and sat in my truck for 20 minutes before going inside. It wasn't that I didn't want the coffee, I just didn't want the looks. Small town like this, everyone talks, even when they pretend they don't. I was sure at least 5 people had already told the story of Bryce's performance the day before. When I finally got home, I went to my desk and opened the folder labeled Clearwater Ridge. That's the development Bryce had bought into last year, his second house, as he made sure to mention at lunch, probably assuming no one else in the diner owned one. The deal had been sitting in review for over 6 months, mostly because my partner Dylan thought we should wait until the market softened a little more. But now, I was done waiting. I spent the next 2 days going over every line of the proposed acquisition. Bryce's lot number was easy to find. His mortgage details were even easier. Turns out, he had over-leveraged himself, again. Bought at the absolute peak of the local housing bubble and financed nearly 90%, which, in normal conditions, wouldn't be the worst idea. But Clearwater Ridge hadn't performed the way the original developer promised. The clubhouse still hadn't been built, the walking trail wasn't finished, and 3 of the properties were already in pre-foreclosure. Bryce must have believed he was buying into luxury, but what he got was a gamble that was turning cold. I called Dylan and told him I wanted to fast-track the deal. He pushed back at first, still thinking we could squeeze another 5% off the purchase price by waiting. I told him I didn't care. We'd buy it at the current number, no negotiation. Not because of Bryce, not just for revenge, but because I wanted control, and I wanted it now. That Sunday, I got a text from my mother like nothing had happened at all. She wrote, "Thinking about you today. Hope you're doing well, sweetie." No mention of Bryce's little show at the diner. No acknowledgement of the money tossed on the table. Just a cheery, passive message like she was sending it to a neighbor's kid home from college. I didn't answer. For 3 days, I let her message sit unread. When she finally followed up with, "Are you mad at us?" I just wrote back, "Busy with work. Talk later." That was a lie. I wasn't too busy. I just didn't feel like pretending to be okay. Later that week, I had lunch with Dylan at a small barbecue joint where we usually hammered out deals. Over pulled pork and cornbread, we finalized the Clearwater terms and agreed to close within 60 days. As part of the project, we'd need to file a notice of community redevelopment, which included a special assessment to fund the infrastructure overhaul. Every homeowner would receive an invoice based on square footage, lot condition, and community value drop. Bryce's came out to just over $83,000. Due in 60 days. No exceptions. I don't feel proud writing that. But I also don't feel guilty. 3 days later, I was home reviewing title records when the doorbell rang. I looked through the window and almost didn't believe it. It was my parents, on my porch, for the first time ever. I opened the door slowly, unsure what version of them I'd be dealing with. My dad's jaw dropped the moment he saw my living room. Sunlight pouring in from the floor-to-ceiling windows, with beams overhead, the lake glistening beyond the deck. My mom blinked, then asked if I was house-sitting. I just smiled and said, "No, this is mine." She paused for a moment before stepping inside like she'd just entered a showroom. They asked questions like tourists. How much did the kitchen renovation cost? Was the fireplace real stone? My dad sat down and, after about 3 minutes of silence, asked if I was involved in anything shady. He meant it. That's where his head went. Not to hard work, not to smart investing, but to crime. I told him, with a straight face, that I had a few investments that worked out. He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me, but also didn't have the guts to say it out loud. Then came the kicker. My mom asked if I could take a look at their retirement accounts. Apparently, they were worried about the performance lately and wondered if I knew someone who could help. My dad jumped in and asked, more bluntly, if I could loan Bryce some money. Said he was cash poor from closing on the new house. I told them I'd think about it. They left after an hour, still dazed, probably trying to convince themselves I was either incredibly lucky or secretly illegal. That same night, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly 2 years, Bryce. He started with small talk, asked how I'd been, then quickly pivoted. Said he'd heard I was doing well and wanted to catch up. Said he was working on a few deals and needed some investor contacts. I told him to come by Saturday morning. He pulled up in a silver BMW that looked like it had just been detailed. Wore a blazer over a t-shirt, probably to look successful but relaxed. As soon as he stepped inside, his entire body language changed. He didn't say it out loud, but I could tell. He hadn't expected this. The house, the view, the furniture. None of it matched the brother he thought he knew. We sat in the living room, and he asked, casually, how I could afford a place like this on a waiter's income. I told him I had other income streams. He nodded, pretending to understand, then spent the next hour trying to piece together what I really did without actually asking. Like he was solving a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. Eventually, he brought up a firm called Rivershore Group, a real estate development company his firm had been trying to get a meeting with for months. Said he couldn't get past the gatekeepers. I smiled and said I'd heard of them. Then I mentioned I'd be attending the industry dinner in St. Louis next week, where several Rivershore reps would be present. His eyes nearly doubled in size. He asked if I could get him in. I said I'd see what I could do. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the event committee had already placed me at table 1 with the senior partners of both Rivershore and Garrick and Boyd, including Bryce's boss, Harrison. Bryce had not been invited, not after a disaster of a pitch last quarter where he blew a deal by confusing square footage with acreage on a commercial build-out. The rest of that weekend, I focused on the final touches for the Clearwater acquisition. Legal docs, contractor shortlists, zoning confirmations, all of it lined up and ready. Monday morning, we submitted the notice of intent to purchase and filed the special assessment paperwork with the city. The invoices would be sent in 2 weeks. Bryce's name was already on the list. Yesterday, my mom called again. Said she was glad Bryce and I had reconnected. Told me how happy it made her to see the family healing. I asked if she remembered what she said to me when I was 16, sitting at the kitchen table, thinking about applying to college. She went quiet. Then she said I must have misunderstood her, that she always believed in me, that they took down my photos because the hallway needed repainting. I didn't argue. I let her rewrite history. It didn't matter anymore. I confirmed my seat at the dinner this morning. Table 1. With the CEO of Rivershore, 2 senior partners from Garrick and Boyd, and the deputy mayor of St. Louis. Bryce will be working the room like an unpaid intern, handing out business cards and praying someone asks for his opinion. He still thinks I'm the family's shadow. But next week, everyone in that ballroom is going to find out just how bright I've become. The day of the industry dinner came quicker than I expected, though I had been ready for it since the moment Bryce tossed that smug insult across the diner. I spent half the afternoon getting dressed, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to control every piece of this moment. I chose a dark tailored suit, nothing flashy, but precise. I wanted to blend in with the money, not look like I was begging for its attention. I arrived early, just as the first few guests were stepping inside the venue. The place was immaculate. Massive chandelier overhead, quiet jazz playing through hidden speakers, staff in crisp uniforms moving like clockwork. I walked over to the host's stand and checked my seating. Table 1, exactly as promised. Right up front, under the soft lighting, facing the main stage. Dylan would be arriving late, so I was on my own for the first hour. That suited me just fine. For a few minutes, I just stood there at the edge of the room, watching. I saw the players enter one by one: executives, developers, government officials, old money types with names stitched into their cufflinks. And then I saw Bryce, near the back, working the crowd like a campaign volunteer. He was all handshakes and surface smiles, handing out business cards like they were flyers on a windshield. He hadn't noticed me yet, which made it even better. Then he saw me, and I mean really saw me. The expression on his face was priceless. His eyebrows pulled together like he was trying to remember if I had a twin. Then came the disbelief, followed quickly by panic. He excused himself from whatever conversation he was pretending to care about and beelined straight for me. The moment he reached me, he didn't say hello or ask how I was doing. He jumped right into it. "What the hell are you doing here?" he whispered, like he was the one guarding the guest list. I smiled calmly and told him I had been invited. His eyes dropped to my name badge, and when he saw my table number, he actually took a step back. He asked if I was someone's +1, voice tight, eyes scanning the room like he expected someone to run over and remove me. I told him I wasn't a guest of anyone. I was invited by the organizing committee. He tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Then he muttered something about keeping things professional and not bringing up family stuff in front of important people. I nodded, told him I was here strictly for business. What he didn't realize was that, in this room, I was the business. As we were talking, the lights dimmed slightly, and the speaker announced it was time to find our seats. I watched the exact moment Bryce realized where he'd been placed. His name was printed on the card beside mine at table 1. Apparently, one of the senior partners from his firm had dragged him in as a last-minute addition, probably thinking it was a kind gesture. We walked over together, and the instant we approached the table, Tommy, CEO of Rivershore, stood and greeted me like an old friend. He wrapped me in a hug, clapped my shoulder, and said, "There he is, the guy who saved our lakefront deal." Bryce froze next to me like someone had unplugged him. Tommy then turned to the rest of the table and introduced me as one of the most forward-thinking real estate minds in the region. Said I was one of the few people who understood how to mix value and vision without compromising the community. Bryce looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. A man named Richard, one of Bryce's senior partners, looked confused for a moment, then asked if Bryce and I were related. Before I could answer, Bryce cut in, saying we were distant cousins. I tilted my head, stared at him, and said, "No, we're brothers. Same house, same bedroom until I moved out at 20. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was electric. Richard looked stunned, then said he always thought Bryce was an only child. Bryce stammered through some explanation about how we weren't close and didn't keep in touch. I just smiled and said, "Oh, we've seen each other recently. Had a nice lunch at the diner last week, actually. Whole family reunion." Bryce's jaw clenched so tightly I thought I heard a crack. Throughout dinner, it became painfully obvious to everyone at the table that Bryce had no idea who I really was. Every time someone asked me a question about redevelopment plans, funding strategies, zoning shifts, Bryce would try to change the subject or steer attention back to himself. It didn't work. By dessert, his shirt was soaked through at the back, and his tie had come loose. After the main course, people began to mingle again. That's when Bryce cornered me at the bar. He was seething but trying to smile. Said I had blindsided him. Demanded to know why I never told him what I actually did for a living. I reminded him that he never asked. For years, he assumed I was nobody because it made him feel better. I didn't know him anything. Not explanations, not updates, not the courtesy of pretending to be small. That's when he shifted tactics. Started talking about how we should join forces. Said we could be unstoppable together. Told me he always believed in my potential. That he was proud of me, really. I let him talk. Then I asked if he remembered that day at the diner, when his date asked if I was special needs, and he laughed instead of correcting her. If he remembered telling strangers that his family said I was in prison because it was less embarrassing. He tried to brush it off, said it was a joke. Said I needed to lighten up. That family gave each other hell all the time. I nodded, then watched his face fall when Tommy approached and asked if I'd made a decision about the Oak Ridge Park project. That's the development where Bryce had bought his second home. I smiled at Tommy and said, "Yes, we're moving forward with full redevelopment. The assessments go out tomorrow." Bryce went pale. He asked what that meant, and Tommy, oblivious to the tension, happily explained that we were overhauling the infrastructure, requiring all homeowners to pay into the improvements. Anyone unable to pay would be offered a buyout, 80 cents on the dollar. Non-negotiable. Bryce pulled me aside, desperation kicking in. He asked if this was personal. I told him it wasn't. That this was business. Sometimes investments don't work out the way you planned. He said he couldn't afford the assessment. I told him that was unfortunate, but reminded him there were options. Selling, for example. A big loss, sure, but not as bad as foreclosure. He stared at me like he had finally put the pieces together. This wasn't some accident. This wasn't just timing. I had known. I had planned. He called me vindictive, said I was a monster for doing this to my own brother. I laughed. I told him that I had spent years being ridiculed, ignored, dismissed, and erased by the very people who claimed to love me. That I had taken the high road for a long time. But some bridges don't burn until you light them yourself. He stormed off, almost tripping over a waiter carrying a tray of wine. I watched him go without saying another word. Dylan arrived just in time to catch the tail end of the disaster. We made our rounds, shook the necessary hands, smiled for a few photos. Before we left, Harrison, the boss who had unknowingly invited Bryce, asked me if I'd be willing to consult on a redevelopment proposal. I said I'd think about it. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat out on the deck. The stars were out. The lake was still. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Bryce had told her everything. And that's when the real fallout began. It started with a voicemail from my mother that next morning, her voice thick with panic. She said Bryce had come over late the night before, nearly in tears, telling them I was trying to ruin his life on purpose. Said I'd orchestrated the entire redevelopment to punish him, that I'd set him up to fail. She asked how I could do something so cruel to my own family. I didn't respond. I let the message play, then deleted it and poured myself another coffee. An hour later, my father called. Unlike my mother, he didn't bother with emotion. He got straight to the point. Said we needed to talk like men and sort this mess out before it got worse. He told me Bryce was in serious financial trouble, that the assessment would cripple him, and he asked, flat out, if I'd consider calling it off or, at the very least, finding a way to exclude Bryce from the redevelopment cost. I didn't say no. I also didn't say yes. I told him I'd think about it and hung up. That afternoon, I drove out to the Silver Pine office and sat with Dylan in the conference room, going through final preparations for the homeowner assessment notices. Everything was ready to go. Bryce's invoice had been reviewed twice, $87,000, due within 60 days. The number wasn't personal. It was just business. That's what I kept telling myself. Right as we were finishing up, our PR team released the press statement about the acquisition of 3 downtown commercial properties. The ones my parents had staked a hefty part of their retirement portfolio on. It was a clean deal, transparent, ethical, and necessary for long-term growth. But the restructuring meant a temporary freeze on dividends and a projected valuation drop for at least a year. By dinner time, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, and texts stacked on top of each other like bricks. My mother sent one long message about how she couldn't breathe, how the stress was making her sick, and how none of this was fair. My father's message was less dramatic, but far angrier. He told me I'd crossed a line, that I was acting like a stranger, not a son. I didn't respond to any of it. I spent that night on my porch, the lake quiet again, the air heavy with spring. For the first time, I felt the weight of what I was doing. Not guilt, exactly, but gravity. These weren't people I'd wronged. They had spent years stomping on my dignity, laughing at my silence, erasing me from their story. But now, I held the pen. 3 days later, I agreed to meet them. Not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to look them in the eyes when they realized who I really was and what I'd become. I chose a small coffee shop downtown, a quiet place with soft lighting and too many hanging plants. I got there early and chose a corner table near the window, facing the entrance. My parents walked in first. My mother looked like she hadn't slept in days, dark circles under her eyes, hands clenched in front of her like she was bracing for a funeral. My father looked thinner than usual, less composed, like something had come undone in him. Bryce showed up 5 minutes later, late as always. He looked angry, not worried. Still dressed like a man who thought he was owed an apology. The moment he sat down, he leaned forward and said, "Are you happy now? You've ruined my life." Was that the goal? I didn't answer. I just looked at him. Then I turned to my parents and asked them if they remembered when I was 17, the night my dad told me I should stop pretending to be something I'm not. The night he said I was born average and should just accept it. My father scoffed, said he never said that. So I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the file, and hit play. His voice came through loud and clear. He told me I'd never be as sharp as Bryce, that I should stop embarrassing myself with ambition, and that the sooner I accepted that my job in life was to support people like my brother, the better off I'd be. The table went silent. My father looked stunned. My mother started to cry quietly, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Bryce tried to wave it off like it was ancient history. Said I was being dramatic, that all families have their dysfunctions. Said I needed to stop holding on to teenage drama like it defined who we were today. I looked him dead in the eyes and asked him if he remembered telling his date I was just born wrong. If he remembered throwing cash on my table like I was begging for change. If he remembered mocking me in front of 20 strangers like I was some street performer in a sad costume. He didn't answer. Then he tried a new tactic. Said I was exaggerating, that the assessment notice on his house was a business decision and I didn't have to let it go through. He asked if I could make an exception. Said he was willing to apologize, really apologize, if that would make a difference. I told him I had no intention of altering the plan, that he had 3 choices: pay the $87,000, sell the house back to Silverpine at a loss, or let it go into foreclosure. He turned to my parents, begging them to intervene. My dad asked if there was any way I could show mercy, just this once. That maybe it didn't have to go this far. That they were worried about Bryce's job, about the family's name, about what people might think. I pulled my wallet out and slid $70 across the table, the exact amount my father had tossed at me during that lunch shift. Maybe you can finally do something with your life, I said, and watched the blood drain from his face. He slammed his hand on the table and called me spiteful. Said no good man would treat his own family this way. I told him I learned from the best. Bryce, ever the opportunist, suddenly got quiet. Then he leaned in and said he had information about Dylan, my business partner. Implied he knew something that could cause problems if it got out. I stared at him for a moment, then pulled out my phone and dialed Dylan on speaker. Told him Bryce was threatening to leak something unless I backed off. Dylan didn't miss a beat. Told Bryce that blackmail was a criminal offense and we had lawyers for a reason. Said he hoped Bryce had a good legal team and then hung up. Bryce's face turned white. He muttered something about being desperate, about not meaning it like that. My mother wiped her eyes again and asked if this meant I was done with the family. If I was going to walk away completely. I said I wasn't walking away. I was standing up for the first time in my life. I said they could reach out again when they were ready to acknowledge what they had done, to offer a real apology, not one driven by financial desperation. And then I left. Over the next week, everything unraveled exactly the way I expected. Bryce sold the house back to Silverpine at a massive loss. Couldn't pay the assessment, couldn't get another loan, couldn't bluff his way out. His firm found out about the blackmail attempt and placed him on probation. His girlfriend, the one from the restaurant, dumped him after a mutual friend told her what really happened. My parents had to delay their retirement by 5 years. The fund they'd clung to for security took a major hit after the downtown restructuring. They're not broke, but they're no longer comfortable. They call it bad timing. I call it math. A few days ago, I ran into my Aunt Rhonda at the grocery store. She asked how things were going, said my mom had been crying during their last phone call. I gave her the short version of what happened. She wasn't shocked. She said something I didn't expect. Told me that when we were kids, Bryce struggled badly in school, had trouble reading, needed constant tutoring, had anxiety attacks before every test. My parents spent thousands on private specialists. I was independent. I didn't need them. And somehow, they mistook that for meaning I didn't deserve them. I don't know if that excuses what they did. I don't think it does. But it helps explain how people can be cruel and still believe they're doing the right thing. I'm not interested in revenge anymore. I'm not chasing their approval. I've made my point. And now, I just want peace. It's been a few months since that last meeting in the cafe, and things have been quiet. Not peaceful, not entirely, but quieter than they've ever been. My parents haven't called again, not since I made it clear I wasn't interested in half-baked apologies or forced family dinners. My mother sends the occasional text, the kind that says nothing while pretending to say everything. She asked if I'd be willing to talk sometime soon, but I haven't answered. My father hasn't reached out at all. Bryce, as far as I know, is still working damage control. He took a position at a different firm under the radar, consulting work, part-time. Rumor has it, he used someone else's last name in the deal. Classic Bryce move. Vanish when it gets messy, reappear with a new pitch and no accountability. I thought that would be the end of it. That I'd finally closed the door, nailed it shut, and moved on. And for a while I did. I focused on the Clearwater redevelopment, helped Dylan with the next round of acquisitions, and even started mentoring a few young brokers just starting out. I didn't tell them about the past. I let them think I was just another guy who had made smart moves early and kept his head down. Let them draw their own conclusions. Then came the invitation. Another industry event, this one in Charleston. Nothing special, just a 3-day conference, more networking than anything else. I wasn't planning on going until Tommy from Rivershore called and asked if I'd join their panel. Said he wanted me to speak about community-integrated development, the kind of stuff I actually care about. So I went. Flew in early, kept to myself, reviewed my notes. The panel went well. People asked good questions, not the typical nonsense about margins and exit strategies. I was just stepping down from the stage when I saw a familiar profile in the crowd. It was Bryce. He wasn't front and center, but he was there. I recognized the way he stood, like he was waiting to be discovered. Sure enough, during the post-event mixer, he came up behind me and tapped my shoulder. Said he hadn't expected to see me there. Said I looked different, whatever that meant. I told him I'd been invited as a speaker. He said he was just attending to support the firm. No mention of which firm, of course. Then he surprised me. He didn't ask for a favor. Didn't pitch me some last-ditch plan. He just said, "You did it. You really did it." I asked what he meant. He said he used to think I was pretending to be content, that I'd made peace with being average. But that day at the dinner, and everything since, showed him just how wrong he'd been. For the first time in years, he didn't sound defensive or smug. He sounded tired, like a man who realized he wasn't the main character anymore, and maybe never had been. He asked if I hated him. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I don't think about you enough to hate you." He nodded, said he figured. Then he thanked me for not making things worse, for not dragging his name through the mud when I easily could have. I shrugged, told him I wasn't interested in being the villain, no matter how much he tried to cast me as one. Before he walked away, he asked one last question. Wanted to know if I'd ever forgive them, him, our parents, the whole mess. I told him maybe, someday, but that it would have to come after they stopped treating forgiveness like a transaction. He smiled a little at that, not because it was funny, but because he knew I was right. The next day, I flew home and didn't think about it again until yesterday. Dylan called, said something strange had come across his desk. A development proposal had been submitted anonymously for a small commercial project just outside Clearwater. Nothing major, but the pitch had my name in it. As a potential backer, I asked him to send it over. The formatting was familiar. The phrasing, even more so. It was Bryce. Not asking for money. Not demanding anything. Just proposing an idea. A decent one, actually. Modest. Humble. Like a man trying to start over without asking anyone to forget what came before. I haven't decided what to do yet. I'm not naive. I know who he was. But maybe, just maybe, I've started to see who he could be. And maybe that's enough, for now.